Honestly, I'm just surprised at you guys. I got nothing to say. Welcome back, everyone, to Afrodo Reviews. Today I bring you a new book, a young adult novel called Sanctuary by Caryn Lix. I think that's how it's pronounced. Decide, is it worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pit of Mount Doom? So let's get started. So I want to preface this review by saying this is a young adult novel, and I am judging it on young adult merits. In the same way that I wouldn't judge a kid's book like, say, Holes or Ella Enchanted on the same level that I would judge something like the Terry Brooks novel Magic Kingdom for Sale or something like that. I don't... It's not expected to be the same degree of writing. So with that out of the way, let's get into the review. So, as I said before, this book is called Sanctuary. It was written by Caryn Lix, and it was published in July 24th, 2018, which I think makes it the most recent book I've reviewed on this channel so far, so congratulations on that. Its general ratings online is good for the most part. It's got a 3.88 on Goodreads. It's got a 4.3 on Amazon, a 4.9 on Kobo, and a 4.3 on Barnes & Noble. I couldn't find a good fifth one, unfortunately. The only one I had left was like one rating, and I at least wanted to show some spattering of how it's seen. So, unfortunately, we'll have to do with 4 this time. When it comes to general trivia about this book, there's not much to say, really. It has 2 direct sequels called Containment and Salvation, which continue the story, and that's a good thing, but I'll get into that later. And this was also Caryn Lix's debut novel, which, alright, that also affects how I judge something. When you read a debut novel, you have to take into account this is the first time this author is getting into the public realm. And while everyone's first novel will probably be their worst. Now, that's not a rule, but it is the standard. So I often take that into account when I judge books, after I learn their debut novels. With that out of the way, let's talk about the cover. The cover, it's really not much to talk about. As you can see, it's kind of bland. In my personal opinion, it's not very fitting. Like, you got these 3 claw marks down the middle. That's about the only thing I can say is directly connected to the events of the story, because the cosmic horror entities that attack them are noted as having 3 claws. Sanctuary, everything else, it just doesn't feel right. I know this is probably meant to be like the outer hole of the prison that they're in, or something like that, but just looking at it, it almost looks like a hole in the ground. Something on an ice planet, maybe. It definitely gives sci-fi vibes, I will give it that, but it doesn't really tell you anything else about the book. The back, unfortunately, with this being a dust cover, the back doesn't hold the story. It just has a background of the stars with a vague hint. It is time. It is come. The harvest has begun. I don't know if the "it is come" is actually supposed to be that way, or "it has come." I guess both kind of work, but anyways. With that being said, that means the synopsis is in here, which is fine, I guess. I personally prefer it just being on the back, and this being more about this kind of being more about the author and kind of stuff, which is normally on the back. Yeah, as you can see, I got this at a thrift store, so I got a big old letter here, and I'm not sure what it is. I'm not gonna go into it right now. Maybe one day I shop at a thrift store a lot. So maybe one day I'll go through all the weird stuff I have found in thrift store books. And trust me, you find some weird stuff in thrift store books. But for today, that's all I'm going about with the cover. So, with the cover out of the way, we move on to the characters. The characters are kind of split up. I'll talk about the main character first, then I'll talk about the prisoners, which are more or less the main characters, Then I'll talk about the guards, which, although they are main characters at first, they get a very much diminished role as the story goes on. The main character is Kinsey. She is a junior guard at Sanctuary who works underneath her mother, who is also the warden. And she's been raised in a household of constant propaganda talking about how great this corporation she's working for. And in this world, the corporations are a lot like a cyberpunk world. They're so big and giant that they basically run countries now, whereas the government is practically powerless and useless. But anyway, Kinsey often seeks her parents' approval, is suffering internally because her parents recently have decided to get a divorce. And she's going through the things that kids often go through during that, which is it my fault? Why are they doing this? Maybe they can patch it up. And despite her belief in Omnistella, this big corp she works with, it's also clear early on that she has at least subconscious misgivings about everything they do. It's not clear, but one of her favorite series is a manga called Super Mecha Dream Girl 5. Anyways, it's all about how a character is constantly fighting against the corrupt and evil corporations that now run the world. She notes that her mother would really hate this series if she ever found out what it was about. But she still reads it because she enjoys the story. There's at least some subtle hints that Kinsey doesn't quite buy all the propaganda that she's forced to swallow all the time, even if she does on the surface. So the next section is about the prisoners. Now, you see, Sanctuary is a space station designed to hold teenage prisoners that have superpowers, basically. They're considered the most dangerous people on Earth, so they took them off Earth after they commit crimes. The characters are Cage, the love interest at large, and a superpowered teenager capable of running at high speeds. Cage is a protective older brother over his little sister, Rune, and something of the mastermind of the breakout that happens later on, in addition to just generally being the charismatic leader of the prisoner. Then you have Rune, Cage's younger sister. She's a kind, gentle soul who literally has the power to merge with technology. She's otherwise harmless and values all lives. She's the first real person that gives Kinsey pause about these people who are locked up in here and if they're really as awful as it's said. Then you have Mia. She is seemingly the most volatile of the prisoners, and she's the one who fits the description Kinsey is often given. She seems violent, constantly angry, and just a general threat. She has the power to go invisible, and it's somewhat later on that a lot of her attitude is mostly a front, and she spends a lot of her time invisible because it doesn't seem like she likes interacting with. But that's just speculation. I'm going to go into that later. Then you have Alexei. He is a hulking brute of a teenager. I pictured him somewhat built like the Juggernaut, if you don't know.
Oh my God! Juggernaut! I thought that was you! I should've...
Alexei has the pyrokinesis power and is a mostly silent but otherwise gentle person who is in love with Mia and does his best to just make sure people are safe. Then we get to Matt. Matt is Rune's implied boyfriend. It never actually confirms, and at most it just kind of hints and winks at us, who has the ability to sense life. He doesn't have much of a noteworthy character beyond this that I can recall off the top of my head, but he is present in a lot of the book, and that's why he's here. Then you have Tyler. Tyler is a nervous teen who has the ability to read minds. He's harmless, and he doesn't seem to even want to hurt a fly. Reluctant to even touch weapons when it's offered to him, even when these cosmic horrors invade the space station and start trying to kill people. So he's another example of Omnistella lying to Kinsey about how dangerous these people are in reality. Next, we get to the guards. Now, really, there's only two worth talking about. There is three more, but we get basic characterization on them at most, and then they leave, never to come back to the story. So I'm just going to go into the two. You have Kinsey's mother, who, as far as I can recall, is never given a name, but she's the warden of the prison. She is loyal to Omnistellar, basically as to the level of fanatic, and she refuses to compromise her loyalty to Omnistellar for anything. She's a perfect example of someone who's been brainwashed by the system and takes their job super seriously. And then you have Rita. She's a more or less foul-mouthed guard who remains behind with Kinsey's mother to watch over the station. She's sort of a foil to Mia, in a sense, in that both are kind of the same person, but on different sides of the tracks. They both put on that front of, you know, angry, mean, I'm gonna beat you up, or otherwise gentle people who are just living with the system they've been born in. After that, it's mostly minor characters. There's a fair amount, but in reality, there's too many to really go into. They're not awful characters, they don't make much of an impression past their initial either introduction or that one trait they're given. They may have more of a character in the future, but for this book, they're not worth mentioning. With that, we move on to the plot. So the plot for this book is simple and oddly complicated at the same time. So, we're in the far future, where the world's governments have lost much of their power, and the world is more akin to a cyberpunk dystopia, as massive corporations now hold all the power in the world. In addition, about 50 years ago, these strange alien devices descended upon the world, and no one could figure out what they were. In fact, I didn't even really know what these things were doing until the next generation was born, and people began to develop superpowers as kids. With that background set up, the plot follows Kinsey, a junior guard at a prison called Sanctuary, which is like a juvenile detention center in space for superpowered criminals. Working underneath her mother, who is the warden, Kinsey gets caught up in a prison break, taken captive by the prisoners so that they can negotiate with her mother, and during a time where they are most vulnerable, i.e. when her father decides to divorce her mother and leave the station, taking 2 other guards with him, basically leaving only 3 guards for the whole station. However, during the prison break, the prison is seemingly assaulted by alien creatures who only seem to want to hunt and kill everyone on the station, starting with the prisoners and then moving on to the guards. Kinsey is forced to work with the prisoners for everyone's survival, and learning that most of the people here are actually people and not animals as she's been trained to think of them as. A lot of them have way harsher punishments than the crime they actually committed, or the crimes in their files were flat out lies to what they actually did, or at least what they admit to doing. One such example is an 11-year-old girl who basically has a life sentence because she accidentally flew in a no-fly zone. And that's one of the biggest kicks to Kinsey's belief in the system. Eventually, Kinsey and Cage, the love interest and leader of the prison break, are able to get onto the alien ship and learn that the aliens aren't actually here to kill them, but they're the ones who sent the probes 50 years ago. And that them developing superpowers was actually a side effect of these aliens planting the right genes in them so they could come over, take everyone with those genes, and assimilate them, turning them into members of this alien race. So after that, Kinsey is able to rescue everyone in the prison, bringing them over to the alien ship, where most of the crew have been left in a sort of stasis, while the ones on the station are doing most of the work by capturing. Then after escaping, the prison space station blows up, killing whatever's left on board. However, not before she realizes that she, too, was actually one of these powered teens. A chip that controls her powers implanted in her at an age too young for her to remember, and her parents had always lied to her and told her she's just a normal teen. The book ends with the teens and Kinsey. None of the guards ended up surviving. The teens and Kinsey deciding that they're not going to go back to Earth because they'll just all be arrested upon arrival and thrown back in jail. So they're going to take the alien ship and kind of wander, trying to find a place to belong. That's the plot. I don't have much to say on it right now. I'm going to go into the compliments and then the complaints, and that will give you most of my opinions on it. Personal opinions! Compliments. The first compliment I have shocked me too. But compliment number one, this actually has a sensible romance. Believe it or not, I actually liked the romance in this book. And while it does reek of the normal young adult tropes that are present in this, i.e. the first time Kinsey even sees Cage, she's just utterly struck and over describes his physical physique about how attracted she is, which it's a little uncomfortable considering she's a prison guard and he's a prisoner, but let's move on from that. And then it becomes uncomfortable again when he's basically her prison guard and she's the prisoner. But once those dynamics settle and the two of them see each other on equal planes, i.e. when the creatures arrive and start attacking, the romance feels very nice and genuine. And with even the first kiss, Cage acts sensibly, pushing her away and telling her, we've only known each other for like 36 hours. And most of that time, one of us was each other's prisoner. And while they do still kiss after that, it's definitely nice that the characters see sense, especially in a young adult, and even acknowledge that this may just be the adrenaline of the moment getting to them at the time and wondering, is this really going to last after this is over? So yeah, it's a nice, decent romance. I bet you never thought you'd see me complimenting a romance in the book, considering how often I complain about it. Compliment 2. I like the choices made around Kinsey. So normally in young adult books, the main character has a very clear pattern when you're designing them. And this goes for books I like even. We're talking the main character is always some form of outcast. If not physically, then spiritually. They always think different, or they're outcast because they are different, or something like that. And they are typically, when they do have an ability of some kind, it's super special in comparison to the rest of the world. We're talking Trish being Divergent in Divergent. We're talking Bella Swan having the ability to resist every vampire's powers. Which, was that ever explained? I feel like that should have been explained. Whatever. And with Percy Jackson being the son of Poseidon. I like Lightning Thief, so that this is me throwing in that bone. And so on, stuff like that. However, when it comes to Kinsey, the author does something, I think, personally unique. It's nice and refreshing to see. Kinsey is not an outcast in any way. She was actually raised in a position of privilege. She fits in relatively well with most of the other people in her group. And the only complaints that she knows are against her is that she's a bit of a suck-up, because she's constantly trying to earn her mother and father's approval, with her mother happening to be the prison warden. So most people just kind of see her as a sucker. But other than that, you don't really get the sense that anyone dislikes her or excludes her for any reason. And even when she does find out that she has powers, it's nothing super like, I absorb the power of the sun to become Superman, or I can fly in space, or something like so extremely powerful. She's omnilingual, which means if she reads or hears a language for long enough, she knows how to read or speak it. Which is definitely a great utility power, but it's not super specific to the situation. She still makes it work, and it opens up a great amount of diversity with it. She's not overpowered. In fact, I would argue that there are several prisoners introduced that have powers way stronger than hers. So, like I said, it's just refreshing to see Lix take on a different approach to how to write Kinsey. And Kinsey even makes mistakes, and serious ones. She, like later on in the book, Matt ends up getting attacked by one of the aliens. In an attempt to get the alien off, Kinsey fires a gun at it. However, what she doesn't notice at the time is she accidentally shoots Matt right in the chest and ends up killing him. And this actually haunts her for the rest of the book, and presumably into the next book. And it's just really refreshing that she made that severe mistake. that while you could argue that it's not her fault, you could also argue it is her fault. It's a genuine mistake she made and suffers for. And like I said, that's just, it feels great. That's all I have for compliments. Now we're on to personal opinions. Complaints. Complaint number 1. The cyberpunk dystopian background is a little pointless to this story. Now, I would normally wedge this into a nitpick, but this is the first book in the trilogy, and the book does end with the implication that there will be sequels, meaning Lix knew she was going to keep writing. Because of that, I have to comment on this. While I like the background, there's nothing about Omnistellar being this giant government-esque corporation and the world itself being controlled by giant government-esque corporations that really affect the story in such a way that it couldn't just also be an actual government. There's no reason that any of these corporations needed to exist for the story to work. It would still work if, say, all the governments came together and created a sort of proxy world government that abuses its power. Or great parts of the world came together and they worked together on certain things like this. I thought at first that the reason that Lix had done this was that Omnistellar, which was the biggest corporation on Earth as far as we're aware based on context, was actually had a deal with these aliens. And that's why they made so many odd decisions here and there, which I'll get into with my next complaint. But no, it's actually implied that they know nothing about these aliens. And while this may change in the sequel, as I said, there's 2 of them, it doesn't matter for this one. I just feel in this book, the Megacorp background was pointless. It wasn't necessary to the end product, and there were ways to make it necessary. Complaint number 2. Omnistellar's prison practices. Yeah, this company should not be running a prison, and it's honestly baffling that things went as smoothly as long as it did in this book, in that context of the universe. I'm just going to go through every dumb thing that Omnistellar does to create this prison. First, there's only 5 or 6 guards on staff at all times. And I don't care what justification is given to support this. It is stupid. There is no extra manpower in case something bad happens. And this is showcased even worse when Kinsey's father transfers off. 3 of the guards, which include Kinsey's father, leave to take him back to Earth. Meaning when things really go wrong, they have nowhere near enough manpower to handle it. Showcased as Kinsey and her mom are the only ones on the prison station because a merchant vessel gives off a distress alert causing Rita to leave, and even before that all of them were pulling double shifts to keep the prison running. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. You want more guards in case something bad happens and you need more than 5 guards to prevent things. 2. Constant unscheduled drills that happen without warning and actually contains an automated process which will sabotage a part of the station to make sure the guards are paying attention. Thankfully, it does specify that it's non-vital parts. Something that if you didn't notice, people aren't going to die, but it should be noticed. And this is stupid because after enough time, the guards are just going to get complacent with these. And when it comes to an actual drill, which we see later on, when it comes to an actual thing happening, they either brush it off as, oh, this is just another drill, and don't take it as seriously as if something really happened. Including the fact that the drill we go through in here is actually a fake drill orchestrated by the prisoners to test the defenses. Number 3. The guards have very little arms to actually fight back if a full-on riot does take place. With Kinsey at one point mentioning that only 2 guards in the entire station have actual guns. And there is a justification for this, saying they rely entirely on automated turrets and defenses to keep the prisoners in line, which include implanted chips which shut down their powers, a defense system which electrifies the floor in the prison sections, a fail-safe which, if they breach out of their level on the prison locks down and then vents that section of atmosphere. But the problem is, if those things fail, or say a teenager somehow cuts out their chip and, has the power to meld with machines, none of these things are going to matter. Or let's say a gigantic EMP hits the station, shuts everything off. What's going to happen then? It just doesn't make sense. So yeah, Omnistellar expected their 5/6 guards, because Kinsey technically doesn't count as a real guard. There are 5 guards to hold off an entire prison of superpowered teens with stun guns and batons. In essence, it feels more like Omnistellar makes these bad calls because Lix needs an explanation of how a group of teenagers were able to escape a prison, and then later on to increase the tension of the horror that's coming after them, rather than a genuinely designed prison that happens to have these flaws. This also ties into my point that I think it should have been Omnistellar should have been revealed to have been in league with these aliens, trading the teenagers for, I don't know, some kind of technology, raw material, something like that. Because it would have made all these flaws make sense. They aren't supposed to prevent the prisoners from escaping, really. They're just here to keep them long enough for the aliens to come pick up their next batch. So yeah, that's what I got for complaints. And it's quite substantial. There's going to be I'll get on to the next. Nitpicks and gushes. Fair warning, it's mostly it's all nitpicks, and there's a lot. Nitpick 1: a wasted Chekhov's gun. In the beginning sections, a klaxon horn is used to signal the drill that is happening. The klaxon horn goes off more than once, is repeatedly mentioned as being really loud and annoying to the point where the guards, who are used to it, still can't drown it out well enough to do their jobs properly, meaning they do shut it off if there's drills just so they can work. Constant attention are brought to them in the early section. So, for all this build-up, when it was revealed to me that the aliens were blind and basically get around by hearing, my immediate thought went, oh, they're going to use the klaxon horns to effectively blind the aliens and escape.
Not this time. It never happened. It's false.
The klaxon horns never come back. And it comes off like a failed Chekhov's gun because so much attention is brought to them in the early sections. It would fit so well to deal with these aliens. And it just feels like a waste. The klaxon horns didn't need to be brought up at all. Nitpick 2. There's a small plot hole. So early on in the book, Brune, who melds with the technology, mentions that the automated turrets are hardwired to only target the chips that are in each of the prisoners. That way they can't be turned against the guards. However, in the beginning of the book, one of the turrets is turned against the guards and fires on them when they go to investigate, requiring Kinsey and her, at the time, the other guard, Noah, to deactivate it. But the guards don't have chips, as far as we're aware. So yeah, small plot hole. Nitpick 3. Overusing a very specific trope. The one where the character, braving the unknown or certain doom, says, I'm going to go alone. And then their closest friend / lover looks to them and says, no, you're not. And that's not a debate. It happens like 4 or 5 times throughout the entirety of the story. And really, after the second, the trope loses its power. With tropes, you want to use them sparingly, because otherwise, again, they lose their power. I brought this up with the Star Wars EU book, Allegiance. How Obi-Wan often talks to Luke in that book, to the point they have almost full-on conversations. And that way, the trope of Obi-Wan, the invisible mentor giving vague advice, completely loses its power, because he uses it so much. So yeah, that's nitpick 3. Nitpick 4. Rune's compassion is over naive. So, one of the things that bothered me at the very end was the characters are presented a decision to vent those aliens in stasis that I talked about earlier into space to kill them, or risk leaving them on board the alien ship they stole and not knowing if they might wake up while they're there. Knowing that these aliens are powerful enough that one of them gave them a hard time. And while the moral debate is fine, I just feel that there wasn't really a debate to be had with this choice. Now the argument comes down to Mia and Cage wanting to kill them, whereas Alexei and Rune don't want to, which leaves Kinsey as the tiebreaker. However, before Kinsey can make a decision, Mia, not wanting to risk traveling, thousands of miles with these aliens on board that might wake up and kill them, while everyone is distracted, walks over and hits the button to vent them all, saying, "There, I made the choice for everyone." Rune is utterly horrified by this, and while Kinsey is horrified too, she sees the logic of what Mia did. It's just, and while I would understand to a degree about Rune's anger and disgust at what is effectively killing a bunch of people in their sleep, the problem is her side seems like a non-option. We already know that these aliens are not only here to kidnap them and effectively assimilate them into their race. We've also been shown several times throughout the story that these creatures are intelligent. They aren't driven by instinct. They know what they're doing, and they're doing it sadistically. They do things specifically to torture the characters, mentally or physically. They get so fed up with these guys evading them over the course of 12 hours that they literally just start killing people, which is how Tyler ends up dying. It doesn't feel like there's another option. The option is literally maybe commit murder, arguably, and ensure the safety of everyone on board, or risk even one of these things coming alive and killing every one of you. If we were given some kind of hint that not every alien thought like the ones on the station, or if we got some hint that it was more instinctual to them than, they were sadistically gleeful about what they were doing to these people. Because we also get hints that these things don't just do it to humans. They attack other alien races too. So yeah, like I said, it doesn't feel like a moral debate. It's poorly handled, and there was really only one real solution that would ensure people's safety. And this is a nitpick because it is at the end, but it was pretty close to being a genuine complaint. So keep this in mind. Maybe it'll be expanded on better in the next book, but I don't know. Nitpick 5. The initial snapshots hinting at the aliens' approach and their mission feel somewhat disingenuous to what you learn their actual goal is near the end. Now, these snapshots, while they're intentionally vague and they're hinting at the approach of the aliens, almost seem to imply that these aliens are a devouring swarm of some kind, a cosmic horror that just wants to eat them. And I admit there's only really one thing that suggests it, but with the vagueness of it, this one thing is good enough. Darkness and sound, sound and darkness, alert but without focus, direction not goal, heat and motion and pain and anger and hunger. Always the hunger, always the drive. That right there makes it almost seem like they're coming here to eat these people. And when you find out that it's actually to assimilate them, that little section right there, the overemphasis that's placed on hunger, makes it feel disingenuous. With that, we come to the final verdict. 7 out of 10. Yeah, I know. For as many complaints and nitpicks as I had, this seems like a rather high rating. But honestly, I did like this book, and I felt, for a young adult novel, it's actually really good. Do I recommend it? Yes. I recommend this book if you like anything of what you've heard so far. It's great for a sci-fi read, and it's got some good elements of cosmic horror. Although I wouldn't go into it for cosmic horror. It doesn't do too well on that point. I can't recommend it, though, if you if the young adult tropes just really get on your nerves, because as good as this book is, it still utilizes a lot of them. And like instantly knowing who the love interest is gonna be the moment the character sees them, just because they over describe how attracted they are. It's essentially tropey but fun. Does it deserve Mount Doom? Now, like I said, it's tropey but a fun and overall enjoyable read. And for a young adult book, it does a lot right. Stuff I wish more young adult books would do. So yeah, it doesn't deserve Mount Doom. You know, I think I've done too many good books in my career so far. I mean, what was the last bad book I read? It was Doctor Who's Only Human, right? And even then, it wasn't that bad. It was a 4 out of 10. You could argue it was so bad it was good almost. No, I want something bad. Something that makes me seethe. Something that... No, not that. Anything but that. They're not ready.